Today we're going to be making a stone material with Inside Substance Designer. This tutorial is only made in part because of patrons like you. If you are not currently a patron, you are missing out on access to a lot of cool different files, such as the stone material and other cool Unity models and assets and other textures. So if you would like to check that out, that's patreon.com/randomartech. Back onto the tutorial. So now that we're going to make this, I'm going to go ahead and create a new substance. You can name it anything you want. I'm just going to call it, I don't know, stone material. Really creative. Woo-woo! And I'm going to set up the basic scene. I do this with every single one of my scenes. I always start with a safe transform grayscale, and I pipe that into a normal map, which is right here. And then this normal map goes into the normal map. The reason I do this is as my height map changes, I just pipe it into this safe transform grayscale. And so let's say I had a purlin noise for my height map. I can just pipe it in there, and you can see it automatically takes care of that. What I then do is I do a curvature smooth. Curvature smooth. It requires a colored map, so I go from the normal to this, and then I pipe that into the color. It gives a nice highlight to the existing normal map, and so it's just kind of a nice color that gives you detail, and it looks nice. The next thing I do is I go ahead and do a uniform color, and I pipe that into both the roughness. I copy that, and I pipe that into the metallic. Now with the roughness, I do like to change this kind of to have somewhat of a sheen, but the metal, unless I'm working on something metal, I just keep black. The final thing I do is I do an output, and I bring my height map from here. So that's just my curvature, safe transform grayscale. And I bring that over to this, and I call this height map. And then I right click it, view in 3D, set as height, and you'll see that it automatically starts to update the shape so it has tessellation. If you want to edit that tessellation, you go to default, definitions. I'm going to go to tessellation here, change the tessellation factor down, actually tessellation factor up, scale down. If you have a slow computer, go ahead and just bring this down if you want to, but that's going to give me a nice looking texture that kind of has some details in it as well. And so there we are, we're done setting this up. The next thing we're going to do, let's go ahead and go back to the stone wall, is we're going to look at how to create the stones. So we're going to do all of these different nodes individually, but we're going to start with this one right here. So the basic breakdown is I always start with the tile generator or tile sampler. I make some random edges using a distance and levels, use edge direction and warp to get some kind of craziness going on to it. I then use some bevel and some warp and some slope blur to give it some edge detail like such. I then work through this, getting kind of a grout using different slope blurs and levels. I then blend it together to get a deeper grout there, level that back up, and then a non-uniform blur to get some grout here. That's actually going to come from a different stage because you can see this is being piped in from somewhere else, but we're going to go ahead and do that really quick. What we're going to do here is I'm going to leave this up on the screen as we go through, and we're going to try and play around with some of the settings to get what we want, but we're always going to just go back to this as a reference because I don't have this whole hierarchy memorized, obviously. That would take a long time. And the core of designing in Designer is actually experimentation. So we will play around with this and see if we can't get the same effects. But if we can't, then we'll go back and actually look at the base nodes. So the first thing I'm going to look at is a tile sampler. So I'm going to go ahead and add one of those. I guess what would be easier is just to copy and paste it, but we want all the base default settings like such. So we want to get this tile sampler to just have a bunch of random dots like such. So let's go through all the different things. The first thing I want to do is change the pattern. Square is actually fine. I could probably use a disk. This would also work just fine, like such. Rotation random, it doesn't matter. Size random, this does matter. So first thing first, we want to change the size way down. So 0.03 seems to work just fine, like such. Size random, move that. Scale random, and I'm just basically making the dots of different size and shape. I'm going to go ahead and do offset, position random. You do want that displacement, we're going good, we're going good. And then the last thing I want is basically the color random. I don't want random colors, but I want a random hue, and since it's black and white, this is perfect. So it kind of looks like a night sky looking texture right there. So that's good. The next thing we want to do is do a distance node. And we bring this into both the grayscale and the source, the mask input and the source input. Right here you can see that as I increase this, it starts to look really good. Let me go ahead and zoom in right there. And it's actually looking almost perfect, exactly how we want it. The next thing I do is I can go ahead and do levels to clear that out. I'm going to skip that and just do an edge distance, or excuse me, what is this called? An edge detect. Like such. Pipe that in. And you can start to see that has a lot of different like abnormalities going on. So I'm going to change this edge roundness. Now that's almost good, unless you want a thicker mortar. And you start to get these artifacts like that. Reason being, I don't know if you can see from right here, but these are also actually slight gradients. It's a little bit darker around here as it gets to the top where it becomes lighter. And so that's where we had the levels. Let's see if we can't just play around with this a little bit. I'm going to change it to grayscale. And you can see as I go like this, the edge detect also changes substantially. If you do only source, that actually takes care of the leveling perfectly. And so we actually don't even need right here a level step like we had. So that's pretty cool. Now we have the different cracks, and you can change this dynamically by just going to the randomness. So scale random, and immediately it updates that. It's going a little bit slow because we have this whole node right here that's being computed. Okay, next we want to do a warp, and we're going to pipe in a Perlin noise to that, and then we're going to bring this up to a bevel, warp, and then a slope blur. So let's go ahead and do that first. Going to put in a warp, Perlin noise, and now we need to change the intensity way down. Something like that. And you can change it to the amount you want. If you want it really messy, it starts to get ugly like that. But you can change that by the type of noise that you pipe in as well. I like Perlin noise. It's fast, it's simple, and it gets the look I want. So we're good there. Next, we want the bevel, slope blur, and warp. So let's go bevel. Slope blur. Probably grayscale. And another warp. Another Perlin noise. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just piping this into the slope, putting the bevel right here for the slope blur. We want a different Perlin noise. So I'm going to go ahead and change the disorder like that. The warp you want way down. The bevel's not looking the way I want it to. Just play with the settings, obviously. It's not the smoothing. It's the distance. There we go. And so I'm going to just bring it down like that. I don't want it to be too sharp. This is the slope blur. I'm going to move the intensity down quite a bit. Okay. I actually like to do min or max. Not max because that's going to give you some weird things, right? I mean, not min. The warp is not high enough. There we go. Crank the samples way up. Changing the intensity of the slope blur. Getting something that looks kind of like that. Let's pipe that into our, what should be our height map here. Oh, that's Perlin noise, that's why, haha. So we're going to pipe that into our height map. And you can see already, it's starting to get pretty decent looking stone effects. Now it's pretty sharp right there. And you can soften that up, or you can harden that down by just changing the intensity. So for example, if I increase the intensity, you can see that it's just making it harder. No intensity would be like that. I like a little bit of these sharp edges. You can change the distance if you want. And just play around until you get something that looks good. Now, even right there looks pretty decent. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to do is kind of play around with the levels. So here I have my stones. I'm going to put it down to the levels and try and get this grout going. And then I can slope blur that again to get a little bit more chunks out of that. And then I can blend these two. The blending is interesting. You just do a linear dodge at 50%. You pipe those in. I'm going to use this as the opacity, so I'm going to basically make a grout. I'm going to push that together. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So the first thing first, levels. I'm just trying to get grout. And that's almost good enough. You can play around with this to get what you want. I'm then going to do another bevel. Excuse me, not a bevel, a blend here. I'm going to put the grout in one. I'm going to put, oops. So the grout goes up, the stones go down, and then I also need a levels to get the grout really dark for the mask, or contrasted like that. So now I have the following, okay? Bevel, we are missing one slope blur, and we need to change this to, I believe it's linear dodge. Is that what it was? Linear dodge, sure enough. Change this down to 0.5. Pipe that in so that we can actually see how that's affecting our different model. You can see that I'm just trying to flatten it a little bit. And just basically give it ridges on the top of that. Now, the larger the grout, the smaller the flat section is going to be. So you can make that really big like that. And we're missing another slope blur, but I'm actually liking how this looks. And again, you experiment and play. And I kind of like the stylized look that this has. And there you go. You can see that we're getting a lot of money out of that curvature smooth. That's giving us the color right here. And that's making that look really, really good. And so the last thing that we can do is we can play around with the levels again. Pipe that back into the height map once more. And I keep saying height map. I hope you understand that that's just the safe transform grayscale that I'm referring to. And now I'm going to play around with this. And you can get different effects that you would like or not like. I actually liked it almost exactly where it's at. This is pretty good. If you want kind of a muddier, smaller stone effect, or if you start going this way, you start to get more distinct stones, and that can give you a pretty cool effect as well. That's actually really cool, huh? And so there you go. I'm going to go ahead and put this into a frame. Right click, add frame. I'm going to go ahead and call this stones, like such. Okay, there we go. Now the next part of the tutorial, what we're going to talk about since we're done with this, is we're going to go over to the dots. The dots are the small little specks that we're going to put onto the stones themselves, and it gives you a more realistic look. So that's the next thing we're going to do, is the dots. Let's take the stones and let's move this way, way, way out of here. You can see the dots only have an output. They don't have an input from anything, so that is good. And we'll start there. So let's go ahead and look at the dots. Again, tile sampler, we know how this works. And I have 3 different tile samplers with randomness. And so some of these, if you go here, have bigger dots. Some of these have smaller dots. And the top one has these small dots, like such. And we just blend these using a copy with a 0.75, meaning that the top thing is going to get the most preference, and then it's going to kind of get softer and softer. So those big dots are going to have almost no texture whatsoever. And then I'm just going to put that into an invert. Once we have that, we come up and we basically just blend that in with our stones to get the effect that we want. So there's little dots on the stones. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing I want is 3 tile samplers. Tile sampler. Going to go here. I'm going to not do a disc, but I'm going to do a paraboloid. That's fun to say. Once again, I'm going to change the size down, 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 down. Something really small, like such. I'm going to change size random, because that's always good. Oops, I actually don't want size random. Scale random. Bring the scale down quite a bit. Scale map multiplier, sure. Position random, yes. Offset random, yes. Global offset, skip all that stuff. Moving down. Color, I do want a random color here so that some of them are less or more gray. Global opacity, you can bring that down as well, so they're not as strong. Now, there's not as many dots as I'd like, so what we can do with that is X amount, Y amount, just increase this a ton. Okay, and now you're actually going to have to increase the size because you have a lot of these small little dots, like such. And there's our first one. So I'll take this, I'll copy it, and then I'll just increase the size. I will go ahead and change the random position. And then I'm going to copy this again, but I'm actually going to decrease the size on this one. Let's see what happened. Okay, so that's the small one. That's the medium one. They copied them in the wrong order, sorry about that. And then we're going to go here and change the X size down, 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 so it's really small. And then we're going to change the, get rid of the scale randomness so there's more. Change the position random, and there we go. Now this is in the opposite order, so I'll just switch that for you. So it goes small, medium, large. I'm going to do blend, copy. And we said 0.75 was about what we wanted. Like that. I can just copy paste this. So Control C, Control V. Take this, put that in the top. Take this tile generator, put it in the bottom. And we actually might want to do it backwards, like such. We want the big things to have the smallest opacity. And there you go. We just have a basic noise. Let's throw this into the transform to see what it looks like. And you can see that the dots are coming out. So we also want an invert grayscale, so that the dots are going into the material. But you can see right there that that's actually looking really quite good. You can change the contrast or the size if you want to, but again, just a subtle hint at this is all I want. So maybe increasing the size of everything just a little bit. So increase the size just a little bit there. Increase the size just a little bit there. And increase the size just a little bit there. There you go. So that's a little bit more visually visual from a distance, and that's looking pretty good. All right, so let's go ahead and right-click this, hit Add Frame, change this to dots, and that's it. So we have stones, we have dots. Now, the last thing that we're going to do in this tutorial, since we're running out of time here, is we're going to go ahead and do the stone directional warp pattern offset. That's a mouthful and a half, isn't it? Let's go ahead and look at this and see what it achieves. This achieves just some basic noise on the stones themselves. And this is going to be used for some texturing, but mostly for coloring. And so this is a fun one. We're going to use a flood fill. Change that to flood fill random grayscale. Get some clouds, get a gradient map to lighten up the clouds. Get a slope blur scale using a Perlin noise once again. Are we using the Perlin noise? This is actually probably coming from the stones themselves. Oh, cool. So that's going to come from the warp of the stones themselves. And then we're going to, of course, do a directional warp using that grayscale that we've made right here. And what directional warp does is it basically will take this, and the grays will warp a certain amount and the whites will warp a different amount. So you get a like there's seams here, which you want in stone. You don't want it to just be one constant gradient across the whole thing or one constant texture. And so we're going to warp and break that up. And so that's going to look really good. Let's go ahead and get to it then. And again, this is more for the texturing than anything else. And so the first thing we wanted to do was the flood fill, right? Flood fill is a cool thing. It'll take, now look at the input that we have. It's coming from this warp. So where we had the edge detect, and it'll take this. So let's go ahead and grab this edge detect, bring it down to our new node, and you'll see it will separate every single one of these. There's a lot of different features. We're going to use the flood fill to random grayscale, but you can see there's flood fill to color, there's flood fill to gradient. I mean, let's look at this. This is pretty cool. And you can see that each of these get a different gradient. So please play around with the flood fills, see what happens with all of these different ones. This grayscale one, uh-oh, did that not work? What am I missing? 2D. Let's try it one more time. Flood fill to grayscale to random grayscale. That's what I want. Okay. And there you go. Now we're going to be able to use this to offset any texture. We're going to go ahead and create a noise pattern for the color itself. So again, we use clouds, and then we just kind of gradient map that to be a little bit lighter. Use a slope blur to get the exact same slope blur as above. And then we're going to put that into a directional warp. Okay, so first thing first, clouds. Clouds 1. We had a gradient. Let's change this to probably grayscale, yep. So grayscale. And then just alter this black node to be a little bit lighter. You can play around with that until you get the look you want. And now we want this to be the same offsetted pattern. Like, we're not trying to get a different one. We're trying to get the exact same offset pattern as this right here. So slope, blur, grayscale with this warp going into it. We want the exact same settings and everything. So I'm just going to copy that down, bring that over, and then put this into it. So now I have that. And the last thing we want to do is we want to offset this so that it actually fits the different tiles or the different stones. So offset. It's not called offset. What's it called? Directional warp. Haha. So bring that in. Bring this in. Crank up the intensity to like 100%. And now you can see that it doesn't, it's not seamless, which is good. So this stone will have a different texture than this stone, and you can't, it's really bad when people just apply this texture flat straight onto something. So let me show you what I mean by that. So we can kind of move this stone directional warp pattern up. Let's bring this back into, where is our 2D transform? We moved it into this, okay. So let's grab that stone pattern once more. Okay. It's really bad when people do this, the following for textures. They just take this and they just put it into the texture. Because you can see it's like, I have my stones, but then the texture just kind of goes straight across. Each stone should have their own individual texture. And so that's why this, not slope, grayscale, excuse me, let me find it really fast. The directional warp gives you the look you want. Let's drag this closer so we don't have to keep going so far. Move that in, and now you can see each stone has their own individual texture. So this one has its own texture, and then it doesn't just slide into this one. So that's a really good thing to do. Let's go ahead and click this. What is this one? That's part of that. That's good. Let's go ahead and right-click this, add frame, call this, I'm not going to call it that big, long-winded name. I'm just going to call it something like like stone texture or stone color prep, like such. And there we go. This tutorial is starting to go long, so we're going to go ahead and cut it short. I have been sick lately, so you might hear that in my voice. I'm a little bit more gravelly than usual. And so we've done the stones, the stone directional warp. We've done the dots, which was down here originally. In our next tutorial, we'll try and get through as much as we can, probably get through the mortar, grout, roughness, and color, and be done with that. Thank you so much. Again, if you'd like access to this material, feel free to... what else was I going to say? Feel free to subscribe and become a patron on Patreon. There's a lot of cool different things on that, and so I consider you checking that out. This month, we're going to be releasing, this month and next month, we're going to be releasing a lot of cool different assets as well. Thumbs up as always. Follow us on social media such as Facebook and Twitter. We love to hear from you guys. Let me know in the comments below, and check out some of these other cool videos on my channel and subscribe. I've already said that like 7 times. All right, see you guys later. Bye.